Good morning.
Morning.
How is everyone today? Good. Good to see you. Fist up even. Well, thank you so much for having me. As Mary explained, we met and kind of got to know each other, and I was so honored to be invited here as someone that can share about the services we have in the community, but also as a follower of Christ. It's an honor to speak to you here in this kind of setting and environment too. So I really appreciate you coming, and great turnout. So thank you for being here. So a little bit about myself. My name's Emily. I grew up in Anoka County here, so it's fun to have landed here with my career. I currently live in Brooklyn Park, so not too far away. I go to church at Grace Fellowship, which I call the Birdhouse Church. People, with the big round window on 169. So, and my husband works for the Anoka County Sheriff's Office. So we have kind of a power couple situation here in Anoka County law enforcement / court. So my background, I sort of fell into victim services. I went to school to be a probation officer, and I went to Winona State University, and I spent very little time as a juvenile probation officer in Anoka County before I fell into victim services. I had done my internship for college at Anoka County Attorney's Office in victim services. And I'm sure, like many people, had no idea it was a job or a career or really a field that existed at the time. I sort of took it like, okay, I need these credits and I guess I'll do it. And what I found was I really loved working with people that have experienced trauma, which I think there's a certain type of person that is drawn to that. Caregivers, people that are very empathetic or sympathetic, compassionate, people that aren't uncomfortable with grief or hurting or pain. Obviously something you can learn, but if you're comfortable with that, victim services might come more naturally. And it just felt like a good fit for me. So I took a part-time position there in 2005, leaving corrections, and then I've been there ever since. So just kept saying yes to new opportunities, and now I've been managing our division for the last 14 years. So we have a team of 10 people. We have 8 women, 2 males. Males have been very hard to bring into our work, I think partly because that compassion, sympathetic piece is not something maybe that men have been traditionally driven into for careers, but in the last few years, we've had a lot of interns come through who are male, which is fun. It's a different perspective, and it changes, obviously, the dynamics of our team. It's also very nice to have a male presence to help guide maybe a male sexual assault victim through the criminal justice system that might be more comfortable for that victim. So, with all that background, I have a kind of a PowerPoint more to guide me than maybe for you to all read. So some of these slides are a little text heavy. What I will tell you is that there's so much information and so many stories I could share, and I know I only have about 45 minutes with you here. I want to leave time at the end for questions. So I'll get through as much as I can. But I also left my business card and pamphlets out, so if anybody wants to have more of a conversation or contact me later, please feel free. So we'll get moving here. One of the first things I like to start out with is just kind of let you know how new victim services is. So the kind of the trend of victim services, or the ability to have something established within a criminal justice system, is very, very new. The oldest victim services programs were started just in 1970. In Minnesota, 1971 was the first year that we had any kind of established program in place for victims, and that was Battered Women's Shelter in St. Paul and a rape crisis program in Minneapolis. Make sure I'm not in your way. And then after that, some of the laws in Minnesota and in the country started getting passed to make sure that there were legal rights for victims. I'm going to kind of move through some of these fast so we don't get too in the weeds, but more to demonstrate just that this is a very new field, a very new kind of establishment. Let me go back to that for a second if I can. So in 1983, this was kind of 1983 and 1985 were the big kind of years for victim services. The Victims' Rights Act in Minnesota, which is our statute in criminal law for Minnesota that says victims have certain rights as they proceed through the criminal justice system like offenders do. With that, I will say the system in our country is not built for victims. The system is built for offenders to make sure that their constitutional rights are protected along the way. What this changed, these laws, is that victims get to participate. So they don't have to go up and charge and be the ones against the offender. The state does that for them. However, they get to come along the way as comfortable as they are, and we can customize that for them and decide how they want to participate and give information. So working alongside the prosecutor's office to make sure they're part of the process. I like to point out this one that just as recently as in 2005, which it doesn't seem that long ago, that the definition of victim in criminal law was expanded to include family members of a child, incompetent, incapacitated, or deceased people. So before that, the law said the victim is the one the crime happened to. So if there was a homicide, the person that died. What this did was very important for us to be able to provide and make room for and find funding to make sure that we had time and capacity and resources to provide victims' families services as well. So that was a big leap for us as well. And so that'll kind of move us into how we define a crime victim. The law says that it is any person who suffers a loss. Basically, it's very general. That loss can be financial, physical, kind of any kind of loss you can imagine. And again, it extends to family members, guardians, custodial parents. And it also includes agencies, businesses. So just because it's a business that was victimized doesn't mean we don't provide the same options and availability to those businesses that might want to be involved in the system and give input. So I think if everyone thinks about a time where they probably either were a victim or they know someone who has been a victim, one of the places we start with is, what do we know about victims in general to be able to provide the best services for them? So one thing we know for sure is that victims don't choose to be victims. There's been a lot of speculation in social media and news about if someone puts themselves in a certain position, that they have foreseen that this would happen to them. We obviously know that victims don't choose to be in a place where they would have to have a trauma in their lives. Everyone that we work with has suffered some kind of loss, and not everyone responds in the same way. So there's a slide in here I like to use called the resolution cycle. And it's not just for victims, anyone that's really suffered any kind of a loss, even if it's not a crime. You think about losing someone that you love or going through something traumatic. Everyone starts in a different place, so we'll talk a little bit about that later. Crime changes the way people live. If you're a victim of a crime, you might act very differently. You might have fear. You might make choices in your life about how to prevent that situation from happening again. Crime can make victims distrustful. Many victims don't trust other people for a long time. They also don't really trust the criminal justice system. So our job is to sort of step in and be that liaison for them. So crime disrupts people's lives. It can destroy our belief that good things happen to good people. How could this happen to me? I take all the precautions. I go to church. I pray. I make sure I feel safe, and I make good choices. And then something horrific happens, and it shakes that whole foundation for people. So another difficult thing is that the criminal justice system and the professionals in it really focus on what happened that day. And a good example of this is for domestic violence specifically. There can be an entire relationship worth of kind of crime and assault and maybe controlling behavior at the beginning. And in the criminal justice system, we look at that one day because that's where the charges are coming from. But to that victim, there's a whole range of years maybe that they've been experiencing this. So sometimes that's difficult as well. So, all right, let's keep moving here. So we talked a little bit about a primary victim, who it happened to, and then also a secondary victim is really any other person affected by the crime. We provide a lot of services to family, but there's also friends that might want to come to court with the victim. Therapists that are involved that might be helping the victim through that. So, and again, the primary victimization is the crime itself, but then there's all these other sources of victimization that can happen for the victim. So it's their spouse, it's family, it's people asking about it, what happened, what's going on with court, neighbors that might have been witnesses to it that may have to be involved in the system. So there's this continual kind of reminder to the victim about what happened when they're getting all of this information coming at them from us, from the court, from friends and family and police officers that need certain things and have to take pictures. And so when people are working through that victimization, it can be hard because they're constantly getting kind of attacked by these messages and other people wanting to know what's going on. So one of the things we do in our work is really try to not bring back the conversation to what happened that day, but focus on going forward and what the victims need individually of how they can move forward and make choices to try to get some control back. So these are just some examples of different kinds of loss that victims may have experienced in their victimization. So physical, obviously an injury of some kind, emotional abuse, financial loss, property loss, or a loss of control. This is my screen I like with all my little cartoons on it, but this talks about the victim resolution cycle. And this, again, is not just for victims. This is kind of us as humans. This is what we work through, and it's not linear. So you could have something happen to you and you might be in shock, but you also might first be blaming yourself. So you might start further down on the list, and then as time goes by and you work through some of that, you might jump up to shock or denial, and then you might move to being, in fear. And because it's not linear, you'll jump around and move within this sort of cycle until you get to a point where you might be able to accept it in some way and move forward. So what's important about this working with victims is that we have to recognize that not every victim is in the same place. Even if the same thing happened to two people, they're going to handle that differently. So our work in the beginning, when we introduce ourselves, is to sort of figure out where people are, and then be aware that we might talk to them a month later and they might be somewhere different. So last month they told me they didn't want to come to any court. But when I call them in a month, I might want to ask again because I want to make sure they are doing what they need to do at that moment that's good for them, that can empower them to be participating in that process. Oh, I skipped one, resolution at the end. So I talked a little bit about, or mentioned, I should say, the statute in Minnesota that outlines rights for victims. These are the 5 buckets that all of the rights fit into. In the actual law, The victim rights statute is over 60 pages long, so I'm not going to go through that with you today. I would put all of you to sleep, no doubt. And I think what's important is to kind of know what buckets those fall into. So these are the 5 main categories of those. And I do have slides that outline some of them. These are the ones that are super text heavy that I'm not going to read through, but I want to just kind of show you and outline a few of them that I think might be interesting to you. So the first one is the right to be notified. So, there are a lot of things that our staff notify victims of along the way. And again, you don't have to read all of this, but one of the biggest things is just that they have rights. A lot of victims don't know that they have rights under the law when they're victimized and that a crime is going through the criminal justice system. Then, we're walking them through the process and notifying them along the way. We might have a victim that absolutely does not even consider themselves a victim. They only called police because they wanted him out of the house. They might not want to work with us at the beginning, and that's okay. We want to make sure they know they can, what their options are, but we don't force them to do that. We also might have someone who presents completely differently. So they absolutely want to be at every court hearing. They want to exercise every possible right that they can. They want to know all the information and be there every step of the way. We can accommodate that too. So the caseloads we have look very differently because we're notifying people along the way based on how they want that notification and how frequently. So as things change in the criminal justice system and through their specific case, we'll be updating them and checking in along the way to see how involved they want to be. The second bucket is protection from harm. So this looks like feeling safe when they're coming to court, feeling safe when they're participating in the process. So keeping them in a separate conference room while we're waiting for court. Making sure that if they have to testify against their abuser, that we prepare them for that and we make sure they know who's going to be in the room and make sure that a bailiff is able to maybe walk them to and from their car. So it's about creating that safe environment for them while they participate in the process. The third bucket is about participating specifically. So this looks like certain places along the prosecution process path where victims can actually assert certain things. So they may ask that on behalf of them, the prosecutor request a speedy trial, which means that a trial has to happen within 60 days. That's something an offender can do too, but there is a specific right that victims are able to do that. It means they have a right to know certain things about the process. That means they have a right to be present and participate that way. So every hearing that we have, we invite victims and we can escort them and make sure that they're able and safely can do that. One of the biggest rights that I think are important along the way, and they all are, but one of the things that I think makes a huge impact in our cases is at the very end of the case, victims have a right to submit a statement to the court. A lot of times when someone pleads guilty and we don't have an actual trial where they have to testify, which is 95% of our cases, victims don't really have a chance to stand up in court and say their piece. They don't get to say what happened to them and how that impacted their life. At sentencing, whether someone pleads guilty or we have a trial, victims have that right. So at the hearing where the judge actually gives consequences, victims get to stand up if they want, it's not required, and they can read a statement and tell the judge, this is how it happened. I want you to know these things about how this affected my life. These are the things I think are important for you to consider when you're going to give a consequence and hold someone accountable. And the reason I think that's really important from my perspective of being in this world for so long is it not only helps a victim get closure in a way, I think they feel like they can confront an offender that has to sit there and listen to them in court. But I think it educates our professionals in the system. I think that listening to a victim's perspective at that point in the process educates our judges and our prosecutors and our defense attorneys and our victim witness services staff just learning about a victim's experience through the process of the case, but as well as how they experience the crime. So I think it's a very important piece. The other bucket here, I think we're on to our fourth bucket, is financial assistance. So there are lots of different ways within the criminal justice system and nonprofits that support criminal justice systems to plug victims into financial assistance. Restitution is something that's part of the criminal case. So we can use that as part of our criminal case to have the judge order the offender to pay that victim as part of probation. But we also have some options that we have through nonprofits, such as emergency fund or our sexual assault fund, that we can plug certain victims into to get reimbursed for things that were expenses related to the crime. The Minnesota Crime Victims Reparation Board is a state agency, so it's still considered a government agency, but they have funds that can pay a victim back right away so that they don't have to wait for the offender to pay them back. For things like funeral expenses are one that gets paid through that fund, or lost wages, where someone can't wait for that money to come through from the offender. Sometimes these cases can take a year or more to move through all of the different hearings and get resolved. Then add a pandemic and things get delayed even more. It's been very difficult to keep victims participating and on board during the pandemic. We've had so many continuances. We've had court move from in-person to Zoom to back to in-person. I mean, it's been a roller coaster of a couple of years, and then think that victims who are just waiting and trying to get some resolution, that we just keep kicking the case down, and every couple months it's really been difficult in the system right now. So our statute in Minnesota also has some specific rights for victims of domestic and sexual assault. That includes harassment cases. So these are rights that are specific to those types of victims because of the nature of those kinds of crimes. So one of them is to be informed of our office's decision to not charge a case. So unfortunately, there are a lot of cases that get referred to our office that our prosecutors can't charge, and there's not enough evidence under the law to support charges. A lot of these cases end up being domestic and sexual assault cases because they're the most intimate crimes. And you think about evidence being corroborating information, so eyewitnesses, physical evidence, DNA. When someone's in a relationship with someone anyway, DNA is going to be there, so that's not helpful. There's usually not eyewitnesses to these kinds of crimes. Usually it's a very intimate assault of some kind where they're the only ones in the room. So it makes those cases difficult to prove. In our office, our prosecutors cannot charge a case ethically unless they have enough evidence to prove that case. So we are required under the law, and our victim witnesses, our staff is kind of the liaison where a lot of these rights, even though the rights are obligations of the prosecutor, our victim services staff are the ones that are communicating with victims about these things. So we call victims and we tell them, this doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean we don't believe you. We don't have enough evidence to prove this case, and we're not going to put you through the prosecution process to get to the end and not have enough to support a conviction. So another one is protection about employer retaliation. If victims want to take time off to come to court, we can get involved with that. Terminating a lease because someone's being assaulted by their domestic partner that lives with them, we can assist with that. Sexual assault victims can make a request confidentially that their offender be tested for STDs and HIV. Very important piece of that. They also don't have to pay the cost to get a forensic exam. Maybe you've heard of like a sex kit or a rape kit that's done at the hospital. Those are very expensive exams because they involve forensic photography, and they have special nurses that have to come in and collect DNA swabs of evidence for these victims. Victims do not have to pay for that. We have a system set up where our county pays for that exam for those victims. Another one is that sexual assault victims may not be required to undergo a polygraph. So they can't be forced to take a lie detector test to say if they're telling the truth about what happened. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit from victim rights to our unit. Like, what does our group do? A lot of people don't know our group exists. Many prosecutors' offices have victim witness services units. Almost all of the county program or county attorney's offices in the state have their own unit. The problem with that is that the county attorney's offices handle felonies. So we are handling the most serious crimes that happen in the county. Misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors, which are the lower level crimes that are not felonies in our state, get handled by the city attorney's office. So there is a county attorney, and then there are city attorneys for each city within the county. And so a lot of those city attorneys' offices don't have the funding or capacity to have their own victim witness services units. They're starting to grow, and there are grants out there to kind of create those positions, but they're usually one person, which is trying to do all the things for that office. So we are very lucky at our county attorney's office to have a well-established unit that can handle the service load that we need to handle these cases. Our group is, we have 10 people on our team, including me. We have 2 legal assistants on our team that help us with paperwork, things like sending initial letters to victims and making sure that those communications go out, and restitution, which is a full-time job in itself, making sure that victims know and walking them through the process of requesting reimbursement for their losses. And then we have victim service, we call them victim witness specialists. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, why we don't call ourselves advocates, because I'm sure you're guessing that all of this sort of sounds like advocacy. So our role is to really provide information and support for victims through the process. We also refer them out for things that we don't do in-house. So part of our job, though, is to work with prosecutors to make sure we're relaying information between the victim and the prosecutor. Our goal is to make sure that victims know what the process is, know their rights, and then help them make decisions to gain control and empower them to be involved in the process as much as they want to be. And the main goal is to get them to that resolution in their process, right? We're working with people for sometimes a year or more, and the goal is to get them to a point of resolution. And that's sometimes outside of the system, a lot of times outside of the system, because the criminal justice system is not, again, built for victims, but there are so many other things that victims can take control of in their own lives to try to get to that point of acceptance and moving on. So our victim witness specialists provide system-based advocacy, and that's why we are not called advocates. So advocates under the law are protected by confidentiality, which means that if you talk to someone in a nonprofit program as a victim, they cannot share anything about what you told them. We are not protected by confidentiality because we work in a government position. So our loyalty is to the prosecutor's office. We are an extension of the prosecutor's office, which means that we have to be under the same rules of evidence as the prosecutor's office. This means that we do not get to keep anything from the prosecutor. So all of our contacts with victims, we need to disclose to the offender's attorney, which creates an interesting dynamic, as you can imagine, when we call a victim for the first time and say, "Hi, my name's Emily. I don't even know if you know this about our work, but we have this program and I'm gonna be your contact going forward. By the way, anything you tell me, I have to tell the attorney and the defense attorney." So creating that relationship when we don't have that protection is really hard. I think what's great about our county individually is that we have Alexandra House. And many of you may know that term or that agency, but they are our community program in the county. They literally have an office right next door to us. But they provide confidential victim services. They are advocates in the true sense of the term. So if we get into a conversation with a victim or they have concerns about us sharing something, we can say, "Hey, I feel like this is maybe a good time to pause, and maybe I should plug you into your advocate at Alexandra House, who's like part of our team," right? But we want to make sure that you're giving the right information to certain people in your team, because we don't want to have to disclose personal information that may not be relevant in part of the case. So we work as a team with other community resources to make sure that victims don't get into a position where a bunch of their personal information that they can at least control is not disclosed to the defense attorney. Another thing about us that's different is that we have time-limited services. So that means that we are working with victims while their case is in the criminal justice system as it's moving through. We start our communication when we get a case and we end it when the case is done. We can still be a resource for them and plug them into things, but unlike an advocacy program where you can call in and request services, we only work with people that we have cases with in our office. So it's not really an open program where you could call and say, "Hey, I have a case that's in South Dakota, but I live here, so can you help me with that?" We, under our rules, can only help victims who have cases within our office. So we would be referring that person out to the correct person in another state or another city, but we wouldn't be able to provide them services within our office. I don't know why I have a double slide there. So, again, another huge text-heavy slide I don't expect you to read. I'll walk you through a few of these, but obviously we do a lot of things. So as I mentioned, we're talking to victims at the very beginning of the case. We explain the process, we walk them through it, we customize services to make sure they can do it how they want to do it. And that may change along the way. We advocate on behalf of their rights and what they want. So we do some advocacy, we just don't call ourselves advocates. We go to hearings with people. We might set up some community programs for them. We help them get ready for trial. So if it is a case that's going to go to trial, we sit down with them with the prosecutor and talk about what that's going to look like. We can bring them down to the courtroom and sit them in the chair that they're going to sit in and say, like, this is how it's going to be. We're going to start with these questions. These are the things that you have control over. If you need a break, if you don't understand a question. So we walk them through that process. A huge piece that we do in our job that I haven't even started talking about because we just don't have time today to cover everything is that we also provide services to witnesses, which is why we're called the Victim Witness Program. We notify witnesses if they need to testify. We get them ready as well. We call them in and have a meeting. These are the things that we need from you. As you can imagine, witnesses who maybe had called police a year ago and then got a subpoena that says, hey, you get to come to court and talk about it next month, are not very happy about having to do that. And they don't understand why. I gave a statement, I told police what happened, why do I have to come? Well, in our system of justice, an offender has a right through that process to cross-examine witnesses, which means we have to bring everybody in that gave information, and the offender and their attorney get to ask their own questions too. And that can be super stressful. It's not convenient. We sometimes know last minute. We're trying to do our best, but we need to make sure we have the people on board that we need to try to prove these cases in court if needed. So we won't talk a lot about that today, but if you ever have questions about it or are wondering, please let me know. I also like to point out what we don't do. There are ideas about maybe what we do as part of our job. We don't give legal advice, we can't. We don't represent the victim, so we will plug them into maybe some legal aid resources or attorneys that would give them advice. We don't tell them what to say. We try to prompt them to remember certain details. A lot of times in meetings, especially with children that we're getting ready to testify, we'll talk about, do you remember hearing something on the radio? What did you smell? What did you feel? Prompting some of those things about how they remember the event. We're not counselors. We do not have psychology degrees, so we don't provide counseling in-house. We provide some support and encouragement and validation, but we are not counselors, so we refer out for that as well. We don't do investigative work. If there is some new information that comes in, we will direct victims or help them get plugged into the investigator on the case so that they can provide it that way. We don't tell prosecutors how to handle their cases. I apparently blocked out this one, but it says, don't discuss the facts of the case with anyone that wasn't present. So although we're providing these services, we don't talk to other witnesses or victims, even in the same case, about what someone else said. We don't write impact statements. We can certainly help people to do that, but we want it to be their own words, and we want that to come from their heart. And we don't issue subpoenas. I think that can change the dynamics of the helping relationship, right? If you come to a meeting with me and I'm like, oh, by the way, here's your subpoena, you gotta come to court next week. We just have someone else do that. So I'm gonna keep an eye on time. We still have about 5 or 10 minutes. So the reason why our position was created was because it's really important for victims to have somebody there for them in the process, but it's also important for the criminal justice system to have victims' involvement. So us being a liaison for them is not just a benefit for the victim, it's a benefit for the prosecutors in our office as well. They play a vital role. We need them to be able to prove these cases and hold people accountable. Every victim has different views about it. As I mentioned, these victim impact statements at the end of the case are super educational for us to learn about how victims are experiencing the system and how they're experiencing trauma. Many people have misconceptions about the criminal justice system. More than half of the jurors we end up coming through about, what crime shows do you watch on TV? How do you think that a case really happens in the criminal justice system? Because a lot of those things about TV are glorified to make them seem fantastical and exciting and entertaining, when the actual criminal justice trial is very boring and very long and very traumatic. So where victims are in the resolution cycle can affect how they work with us, how they cooperate with the case, and how much they want to participate. PD here is public defender. Like offenders who don't get to choose their attorney in the process, victims don't get to choose their victim witness specialist, and they don't get to choose their prosecutor. So we try to do the best we can to customize those services for them. And as we mentioned, again, criminal cases can last years, especially during COVID. So the time up front to understand your victim, who you're working with, what things are important to them, how they see justice at the end of the case is really important. And they are educated through the process as well of the criminal justice system that they're sort of forced into. A lot of people don't have to think about the criminal justice system outside of watching Law and Order. And if you're a victim of a crime, which you didn't choose anyway, and you're forced into it, then all of a sudden you're trying to navigate this very complicated, not victim-friendly system. So this gets a little bit legal, but what I will tell you about this slide, which is otherwise unnecessary for you to know, is that there is administrative authority by the state to investigate and give sanctions to programs that don't follow the victim rights statute, which means, in short, there are teeth behind the victim rights statute. We are obligated and we have to follow these rights that are outlined in our statute. There is an entire unit called the Crime Victim Justice Unit. It used to be called the Office of Crime Victims, I hate this word, Ombudsman Office. That's probably why they changed it, actually, because it was so hard to say. But they are the ones that hear from victims. Victims call and say, I think my rights were violated by this office and I want you to investigate it. And they have people to look into that. So there are teeth behind that statute. I might skip a couple of these slides just because of time's sake. Some of it gets a little bit in the weeds about details. And if I'm being quite honest, I'm using this from another training that I used for college students, actually, at Hamlin, who are working through criminal justice systems and working on their degrees and may not have thought about our position or how their work affects victims. So I like to share this slide for communities because I think that a lot of the things that we do in our role are things that you can do as community members. So if you know someone who is a victim of crime or trusts you to come to you with that information, you can be a resource for them. You can be a support person for them through that process. So these are some tips that when I'm training in new people in my team, things that I like to remind people of. So always be prepared. If you know someone's going to talk to you about something specific, do a little bit of background research. Figure out maybe what your community resources are, who you could potentially plug them into. Our office is one of them. There's a lot of other nonprofits in the community that we live in. Don't make assumptions. We talked about everybody handles cases different, everybody handles victimization different. So try to get information from them about how they feel about it. Don't judge, don't push, ask questions. Don't make promises to them that we can't control. Stay in the present with them and don't offer your opinion, but maybe kind of echo back what you're hearing them say. Usually when people disclose a victimization, it's really difficult for them to do because it's shaken their entire world. They had something happen to them that took away their control and their sense of normalcy. And so if they've chosen you to be that person, that's a very important role for you to fill for them. And you might be the liaison for them to plug them into some services that they need or give them information. Communicate with us. We will always help you and point you in the right direction. Some helpful things to say to people that may have experienced a victimization. I'm sorry this happened. I can't imagine how hard this was for you. Are you safe now? Thank you for talking to me about it. This wasn't your fault. Violence is not acceptable. I believe you. And no matter what the outcome is, it's important to take care of you. Some things that can shut victims down that we found are not very helpful. I know how you feel. Sometimes we think empathy in that sense or that directly can be helpful for victims, but it can actually shut people down by saying like, oh, I don't need you to tell me about it because I already know. Don't worry, it's gonna be all right. And we don't know that it's gonna be all right for them. We can't assume that. We're lucky it wasn't worse. So the silver lining, right? Like painting a silver lining on it. You'll get over it, try to be strong, put it behind you, calm down, relax. I had a case just like this. This wasn't as serious as it could have been. Or I've had lots of cases like this, so I know how to work with you. All things that probably come from a place of trying to make the victim feel like you're capable, but not necessarily what they want to hear at the time. Oh, I'm only interested in the facts, ma'am. You know, the old law enforcement. I think this actually might be one of my last slides, so I'm really excited about where we're going with timing here. There are so many other considerations we could spend hours talking about. Things that are barriers for victims coming in that make it harder to go through this process and provide services. So victims that come from other countries that don't speak our language make that harder to build rapport and help someone through the process. They may be worried about immigration status or rejection from their community. People that have traumatic brain injury because of an accident or because of a crime. They may not be able to cognitively follow or remember all of these things. Obviously, we work with minor children that are sexually assaulted or abused. You know, working with kids is completely different than working with adults who can kind of understand this language and make decisions about how to reassert control. Minor children don't necessarily know how to do that. You know, we work with victims as young as, newborns all the way up to the elderly community and people, you know, in their 90s or above. I mean, the range of people and their own experiences in life changes how they show up, just like in every aspect of their life. So really trying to understand how they're showing up and meeting them where they're at. These are two of my favorite things that keep me grounded when I feel like I'm super overwhelmed and like I'm not helping anyone. Sometimes we say, I tried to help and I only made it worse. So no one's expecting us to save the world, but we could do the best we can. Otherwise we would have been born wearing a cape and tights. And of course, Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So all of us have an opportunity to help people and increase people's faith in the system. And I hope today you were able to take something away that you didn't know before and at least know that there's a resource out there for victims if they do become forced into the criminal justice system and you just have one more tool in your tool belt to help victims. So I super appreciate your guys' time. I know we have about 6 or 7 minutes. If anybody has any questions for me specifically, I know there's another service here in 5 minutes too, so. Anybody have any questions or anything? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a quick one. I just recently was aware, I know people who train dogs, and I was told that they've been using trained dogs to help with witnesses and victims. Have you had experience with that?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked this question because I'm going to tell my county attorney about it. I have been working on a proposal for 3 years to try to get a facility dog in our office. Courts, did anyone see the article in the Star Tribune? I think it was like last week about it, facility dogs. There are facility dogs that are sort of like therapy dogs that work in other county attorney's offices. So when victims have to come in and prep with us and meet with us, they have a dog there that can really help them feel more comfortable. We have had discussions about it. It hasn't happened yet, but I keep hoping that within my career, we will see it happen in Anoka County. Some of the judges are not real keen on having them in the courtrooms yet, but I think as other county offices have that happen, it will hopefully trickle down to us. So, no, thanks, that's a good question. Anybody else have any questions about our job or anything yet? Go ahead.
Do you have difficulty where husband-wife roles may have differed in other country, and then when they're an immigrant to the U.S., husband, for example, may think he has certain rights over his wife, but that may not be the case here in the U.S. Tension?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of our domestic cases, when we're working with other cultures, have those sorts of dynamics. We have another situation sort of similar where I have a case of malicious punishment. So very vague details, but stepdad used a belt to discipline the children. And in their community, I can't remember what country they're from, but that would not be a crime in that country. And so they feel like they were justified in disciplining that way. But in Minnesota, that is a crime to use a belt on your young children as discipline. So now we're preparing a child who is 5 to come in and testify against their stepdad because they won't admit to anything and they refuse to take accountability. So a lot of those issues, definitely with just the cultural diversity within our community of things that we see. It's a good question too, a good point. Yeah. Anybody else have questions or comments or maybe things you were hoping to learn that I didn't cover? Mary?
So we've learned in Rachel's circle that the most dangerous time for a woman is when she's trying to leave the house, because that's when she is, well, that's statistically the most number of homicides happen during that time. So you were giving the victim a chance to speak in court and make their statement. Is that ever precipitate any danger?
Yeah, that's a good question. So victims along the way are making choices depending on their safety. So that may be a very good reason why they don't want to give a statement at trial. They think it's going to make it worse, or they're going to make the offender more angry by talking about how they really feel about it. And what's great about our system of justice is that it's not the victim charging the defendant, right? It's the state. So our office gets to be the bad guy. Victims don't, as much as you might, another myth, as much as you might think victims have the power to control if someone's charged with something, like sometimes you hear, oh, I can drop the charges, or I don't want to press charges. Once it gets to our office, victims don't get to make that choice, which can be a good thing because they don't have to be affected by the pressures that they might still have from the offender and then feel like they have to get rid of the case because now it's in our hands. So we can say in court, oh yeah, the victim doesn't want this charged because that might help the victim's safety. But we can say we're still charging it. Like we're going to continue with the case. So victims sometimes don't like that because they want the case to go away. So we have to explain that they don't have that control and that the state has an obligation to charge someone if we have evidence of a crime. But in the end, we can often we didn't even get into outcomes and sentencing and things like that, but most people are being put on probation with conditions, which means we can plug them into programming and education. And if they're going to continue a relationship with someone, we can give them tools and education to try to make their relationship healthier. So, yeah, go ahead.
Want me to tell a little story?
Sure, do you want to use the microphone just because I know you're soft-spoken from when I spoke to you earlier?
I had no idea that this program existed a number of years ago when I was teaching in the junior highs. I was out doing hallway duty. It was when kids were on their way to lunch and some kid threw a MacGyver bomb in the wastebasket. Unbeknownst to any of us that were standing there. And like 2 minutes before I'd I'd said to this kid, go get rid of your gum. And they would, to make a big show out of it, they'd go to the garbage can and they'd stick their head over it and get rid of their gum. And, you know, hall's cleared. The other teacher that was out there was heading back. And all of a sudden there's this big boom. And of course I ran to the cafeteria thinking something had happened in there, and everything was fine in there. And so I was kind of, okay, and went along with my day. And then at the end of the day I had to give a statement. And I'm thinking, yeah, but I was just standing there. I didn't see anything. And I was so surprised when I actually got a call from the office saying, we're here for you. And you may be called to testify, and if so, this is what's going to happen, and how are you doing? And, you know, as everybody came upon me, I woke up several times, months later, with that sound in my head, thinking it was happening again, which surprised me. But they kept really close tabs. And, you know, thankfully I didn't have to testify. The kid finally fessed up that he was the one that had done it. But I had no idea these services existed, and they made a difference.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. She approached me earlier before we started. I think that's a good point you make, though, because victims are not the only ones that these crimes affect. You know, hopefully no one was hurt in that scenario, but even the people that were in the school or near at the time were probably traumatized by that.
Well, the other teacher was a Vietnam vet and wanted to live more.
Yeah, can you imagine? I mean, so there are lots of things even witnesses need that we can plug people into, or at least help get in place if those are things that people need. So yeah, any other questions or stories? I know we're right at 11. But I'm happy to stay if people have any questions afterwards. Oh, Mary?
Not really a question, just a huge thank you to you for coming. And I know you're probably going on a trip tomorrow.
I am. Time off is important.
So to add this in is really a sacrifice, but thank you so much. One more thing is Marty Gray makes these beautiful little cards, which are very benign and beautiful on the outside, and have phone numbers that you could just slip to somebody. Lately, one of our members, Robin, are you here still? Yeah. You've given them to waitresses, and they took them. You know, so they're up here with the other brochures from Emily, and please feel free to take some. Thank you so much.